Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the mutations that this deck comes with. It is a filth deck, so it's only natural that it would include some mutations. First thing to note about these mutations is that they are only considered filth units. They are not considered cave filth units, so they can only be included in cave filth or filth decks, not cave goblin. Also, the backs have the filth logo, so if you don't sleeve your cards, you will be able to tell the difference between them and the rest of the Alliance deck. But I guess this makes the most sense thematically to do, to keep them only in the filth, and it makes sense for balance reasons. There's an event in Frick's deck that allows you to get summon 2 units with a cost of 2 or less for free from your hand, and that'd be pretty overpowered. Before I get into talking about the specific mutations this deck comes with, I'd like to talk a little bit just about some general considerations for how mutations work in the Warden's deck. It's definitely a different vibe than the Demagogue's deck, namely that his style isn't as dependent on mutations, and this is because he can't reliably draw the mutations he wants at the right time when he needs them. So they're a lot more situational. Can't just grab the one you want and be prepared to use it when the perfect scenario arises for it. Another reason why mutations aren't quite as effective in his deck is because he's not as good at denying the magic from these mutations through cycling. The best way he really has 2 ways with this base deck to deny the magic, and that would be by cycling with the Legion mutant, which will be shown later, or by using the Overwork event to deny that magic, which that's really his best way to deny magic when it comes to mutations. Really good synergy there. So yeah, since he can't reliably cycle mutants, you're going to be more likely to give away magic with these mutants. So you're probably going to want to use mostly high life mutants in your deck, especially ones with good defensive abilities, like Grotesque mutant shown here will be good in that regard. Also, another reason to pack mostly high life, strong, expensive mutations in his deck is because you'll be able to get the most use out of the Enlist event this way. Okay. Anyway, so moving on to the actual mutants themselves. The Grotesque mutant has 1 attack, 4 life points, and a summon cost of 3, and is melee. It has the Cowering Fear ability, which says each time a common enemy unit moves adjacent to him, roll a die. On a result of 4 or higher, place that unit on top of your prison pile. So the first thing to note is that this is a defensive ability, and the defensive abilities naturally work better with higher life units, so that they can get more use out of their ability before they die. So, like in this case, if he had only 3 life points, he statistically wouldn't be able to get as many enemies into the prison pile before he died, but 4 is better, so he'd be more likely to survive longer and maybe get another unit out of it because of the longer lasting life. The natural comparison here is to the Fear ability, with which the Savager of the Swamp Orcs have, and I think Skull of the Fallen Kingdom have. And that ability is the same thing, but with two differences. The regular fear ability only triggers on a result of 5 or higher, so this one is statistically better in that regard, which is great. And the regular fear ability places that unit into the discard pile. And here we place it into our prison pile, which is better because a lot of our abilities here trigger off of having units in your prison pile. So yeah, this is a pretty cool mutant. It has a total of 5, 1 attack plus 4 life points for its summon cost of 3, which is standard for a 3-cost common. But factoring into the fact that this is a mutation, and usually for a mutation, they're even better deal than that. Usually a total of 5 is a 2-cost mutation, unless the ability they have is really good. And so it gets bumped up to a summon cost of 3 because the special ability here really is that good. Very good for fending off swarms. It's getting harder for the enemies to overwhelm the filth just by gathering up a bunch of small commons, hoping to overwhelm them, but that's not working as well as it once used to because of some defensive abilities, or later in the assault mute, or what is it called? Can't say anything right today. The barbed mutant, as will be shown later. Another thing to note is that, like with the fear ability, this unit is best positioned adjacent to an enemy wall. So how this works is you move it, position the grotesque mutant adjacent to an enemy wall, so that every time they summon a unit from that wall, if it's a melee unit, they're going to have to move adjacent to the grotesque mutant and trigger his ability, potentially discarding him to the prison pile. It also basically blocks off that whole row, or I should say column, because we're looking at vertically on the board, on the battlefield, because you can't pass him in that column of spaces next to him on either side of him, because you could potentially be discarded. So even if you're going more than one, even if you pass him, you don't end your move adjacent to him. It still triggers, and the reason why it's good to take a spot next to the wall is because if you're summoned adjacent to him, it wouldn't trigger his ability. You have to move adjacent to him, and summoning isn't considered a movement, so you can't just summon adjacent to him anymore. So you actually have to move up to him to attack him. Naturally, ranged units are going to be better against this guy because they're not going to trigger his ability, but it's a pretty solid mutation here. Very good in the Warden's deck, and it also has some degree of use in the Demagogue's deck, just because it can help you fight off swarms, which is the best strategy against the Demagogue. You got to overwhelm him early, or there's no way you're going to be able to win against the Demagogue, really. A pretty good mutation, and I could see it having a place in both Filth decks for me. The second mutation is called the Legion mutant, and it has the Merge Flesh ability. 0 attack, 1 life point, 0 summon cost, and is melee, but its ability says when you summon him, you may spend up to 4 magic points to place that number of units from your prison pile under him. Add 1 to his attack value and life points for each unit under it, up to a maximum of +5. This ability can never be lost as a result of an opponent's card effect. So the first thing to note is that the original common under it that gets mutated counts for his ability, which is why, even though you can take up to 4 prison units and put them under him. That's why it says +5, because the original one under him counts for his ability. So you'll see here that he's really flexible in the regard that by having between 1 and 4 units from your prison under him, or actually 0 because you can choose none and just place them on 1 original common, get a 1 attack 2 life point unit, so that you can have a really big range of investment and resulting stats depending on how much you want to invest. You can have as small as 1 attack 2 life if you don't spend any, to up to 5 attack 6 life points if you spend all 4 magic points and 4 prisoners. This ability can't be negated. I think it would be really cool if when negated he could explode into a bunch of prison units all over the board. But in terms of clarity for the rules, it could probably get pretty hairy in a scenario like that. It'd be hard to pull something like that off, I think, without just confusing people as to how that would work. So it's probably for the best that this can't be negated. So yeah, as you can probably tell right away, that this guy can become incredibly strong if you spend all 4 magic points and 4 prisoners. You can have 5 attack and 6 life points, so it'd be one of, if not the strongest unit in the game. But it comes at a high cost because the prisoner is essentially a magic point. So it basically costs you 8 magic to do so, and it would be risky because whenever he gets destroyed, your opponent gets all of the cards under him too. So it's very important to deny your opponent this magic, either by killing him yourself or using the overwork event again. That's very good for this, or cycling a different mutant onto him and destroying it, getting the magic back. So yeah, it's kind of risky. Another thing to note is that if you cycle a different mutant onto him and that new mutant isn't destroyed by the amount of wounds, then the new mutant doesn't get any benefit from having those cards under them. They're just a normal mutant with a lot of cards under them, so when they get destroyed, they're gonna give a lot of magic to your opponent, so you got to be aware of that. The fact that it's 1 life point makes it good for cycling units by summoning it onto a wounded unit and getting your magic back. But I think if your only purpose for the Legion mutant is to use them for cycling, you're kind of doing it wrong. And I say that because there's already 2 other 1 life mutants with some pretty cool abilities, the Incanter mutant and the Void mutant. They have a summon cost of 1, which with the exception of the Legion mutant is the lowest for any mutants, so they can be cycled on anything without having to pay an additional magic cost. So I'd say they're actually better just if you're only using it for cycling. They're a better way to go. They have some cool abilities which can be really useful. But yeah, the Legion mutant, I think, is usually just brought in to like finish off your opponent. Like, who cares if you're giving away like 5 magic if you're able to kill your opponent's summoner? You've already won. Who cares about the magic? Having said that, I find this guy kind of to be too risky in my experience for wanting to run him, or just because it is kind of hard to deny that magic to your opponent 100% of the time. But yeah, he definitely works with a certain strategy. Again, this because you're going to have a finite number of prisoners and a bunch of different ways to spend those prisoners on. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about this in the game. You can potentially look at a bunch of different units like champions or the Legion mutant and focus on just that one card and make that your sole purpose, your sole plan for winning the game by focusing on this particular card. Yeah, again, not my favorite mutant. I'm probably not going to play this guy too much. Definitely wouldn't play him in the Demagogue deck because I don't think I'm ever going to get any use out of his ability. They are not going to have many, if any, prisoners in that deck. And if I just only use him for cycling, I would rather use the Void or Incanter mutant, like I said earlier. Next is the Poison mutant. It has 2 attack, 3 life points, is melee, and has a summon cost of 2. It has the Poison Sting ability. When it wounds a common or champion with an attack, instead of adding wound markers, add 1 poison marker for each wound. For some reason, this box did not come with the Poison Rules card. But anyway, the gist of it is that you can't attack if you have a poison wound marker on you. You can't attack if you move 2 or more spaces during your turn, and you reduce the results of your attack die by 1 for each poison marker on it. So pretty powerful there. Very good against champions. Better against melee units because their attack range it decreases a lot, whereas a ranged unit can still attack things from afar, even if it didn't move or only moved 1 space. So pretty good there. It also tends to make healing abilities better. So definitely it's better to heal a poison wound than a regular wound, which is good because I always kind of felt that healing abilities were kind of undervalued. With 2 attack, 3 life points, and a summon cost of 2, it's on par with the Bestial and Absorption mutants. So it kind of competes with them for the 2 summon cost spot in your deck, and it's pretty ability wise I think it's about the same, so they're kind of equal to each other in terms of overall strength. It does compete with the Claw mutant for the anti-champ role, and this is a lot cheaper way to do it with only a summon cost of 2, but I still can't picture it uprooting the Claw mutant for the best spot as anti-champ unit, because 5 attack regularly is just so hard to do, and there's not really much that can beat that in my experience. Next is the Barb mutant. It has 2 attack, 4 life points, summon cost of 3, and is melee. It has the assault ability, so when he attacks, it may attack all enemies that are adjacent to it, and to resolve each attack separately. There's not a whole lot that needs to be said for this one. It makes sense just by looking at it that this guy is pretty awesome. The ability to attack multiple units while only taking 1 attack slot is just great. It's like a mini Hydrake or a big Berserker. Very good unit. I think this is basically an auto include for me in the Demagogue and in the Warden Filth decks. It's pretty hard to argue with how good this guy is. It's so much harder to swarm the Filth now, like surrounding them. There's like a real punishment for that now. It's so much harder to overwhelm them, like I mentioned with the Grotesque mutant, and this continues that trend here. This ability is also good because it punishes your opponent if they gang up on him and they fail to finish him off, which is going to occur pretty often because he has 4 life, so he's going to be able to survive a lot of punishment, and it'll happen a lot because opponents tend to gang up on mutants when they're going against them. This makes sense because you get a lot of magic from a mutant when you kill it, and whenever you kill a mutant, that's one less mutant in your toolbox you have to work with. So it makes sense generally to spend as many as all 3 attacks just on one mutant. Well, here, if you don't finish him off, you're going to be in a world of hurt, where he can be attacking 2 or more units at once, delivering a lot of pain to you if you can't finish him off. So again, great for taking out those swarms. Just a great unit overall. Maybe my favorite mutant here in this deck. Next is the Burrow mutant. It has 4 attack, 3 life points, a summon cost of 3, and is melee as well. It has the Burrow ability that says when moving with him during your movement phase, you can move it 1 additional space. It may move through other units, and when attacking with him, you reduce its attack value by 1 for each space it moved on that turn. So it's really flexible here. You are exchanging his attack for movement, so you can choose to have one turn a mutant that can move really far but have a low attack, or you could have a unit that can't move or doesn't move but has a really strong attack. It has the strongest base attack of any mutant, which is cool. So the main use here, I think, is to summon him in situations where he is immediately in a useful spot, which is easier to arrange, I think, maybe in a demagogue deck than in a warden deck, because of the mutagist or mutagist, depending on how you pronounce it, ability, you are able to draw them specifically when you want it. So you can bring them out in a situation that's going to be most useful to you. So in the best way, I think, is to use them is to either swap them onto a unit that's already in a advantageous position, or to bring the stone flesh mutant in and summon him off of him deep in enemy territory and be able to drop 4 attack in deep in enemy territory unexpectedly. That's going to be really hard to deal with. Can do a lot of damage that way. But his movement restriction, or the attack restriction when he moves, is a pretty big downside. In general, you're going to have to move at least 1 space in every turn. So having the 4 attack is not gonna happen as much as you'd think. If he moves 1 space, he has 3 base attack, which makes him comparable to the Horror or Winged Mutant, but he doesn't have the abilities that they have to move through walls, or to the defensive ability that the Horror Mutant has. So in that situation, he's not as good as those guys. Again, the best way to use him is probably where you can swap him in or summon him deep in enemy territory where he's already in an advantageous position. Because if he's going to have to be moving around to form a defensive position or to go on the attack, he's not going to be nearly as effective. His final mutation is called the Bone Mutant. It has 3 attack, 4 life points, and a summon cost of 4, and is melee. And it has the Bone Chart ability, which says when attacking with him, you may place 1 wound on it to treat it as if it has the bow symbol instead of the sword symbol during that attack. So there's only one other ranged mutation, and that's the Spew Mutant in the Demagogue deck. And so it is nice having another unit that can potentially be ranged, but it comes at a steep cost where he has to wound himself in order to use it. And it is probably important to know that you place the wound before you attack with him. So if you have 1 life point left, he is instantly destroyed. He can't attack first. He just dies. So at a summon cost of 4, he is competing with the Corpulent Mutant and the Claw Mutant at for that slot. But in a way, he kind of matches up evenly with those. Kind of. He's not as good as the Claw Mutant, but he's kind of on par with the Corpulent. But it's kind of a gray area. They're all pretty good. With these mutations, they're all really good. You kind of can't go wrong. The first, or I guess the main thing to compare them to would be the Spew Mutant, because it's ranged. The Spew Mutant has 2 attack, but if it does 2 or more wounds, can get an additional wound. So the Spew Mutant statistically has a higher percent chance of getting 3 wounds on a card than the Bone Mutant does, actually. But the average number of wounds that the Spew Mutant does is lower than what the Bone Mutant does. The Bone Mutant does 2 on average, and the Spew Mutant's a little lower than that. It has some nice flexibility between melee and ranged. Sometimes you want them to be ranged. Again, a pretty solid card here. It's very flexible because it's not as prison reliant as a couple of these mutants. It can fit well in both decks really well. Yeah, I like this guy. I don't know how many decks I'm going to put him into, but it is a nice choice to have, and some pretty cool art as well, I must say. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Warden starting setup. As you can see, he starts out in the back row, and he has a Taskmaster in front of him, which is surrounded by 3 prisoners. His wall is in the 3rd row. Now, you can see I have the first run of the alliances set, so it says slave for A, where it means prisoners. Now, this is a pretty interesting setup. It's more on the defensive side because you don't have any units on the front row. I should say the 4th row, so you can't really get too many things going on the attack right from the get-go. You can't be super aggressive from the start. But you have a Taskmaster in the middle who can increase all of your prisoner attacks by 1, which is pretty cool. So you have a lot of options there from both movement and attack increases. Again, it's a little more on the defensive side because these units are not very aggressively placed, but it's definitely nowhere near as defensive as the Demagogue was. There's not really much of a risk of assassination here from the start because you're starting with 4 units adjacent to you, which have some good life to them. They all have 2 or 3 health, and the Warden has 9 health, so the risks of starting out at risk for assassination are quite low. Of course, it depends on who your opponent is, but in general, I think if I win the die roll and I get the choice, I think I would tend to go second with the Warden because it's great just to start off with a handful of cards, get some events going, get things working in your favor. A big reason of that is because there's not really any. You can't do much attacking if you go first, probably, because your units aren't super aggressively placed, and you kind of want to wait for them to come to you first. So if your opponent goes first and starts attacking you, you're not really in an exposed position, so you're not really losing out if they start out on the attack. So in general, I think for most matchups, I think I would choose to go second. Something else you might want to think about is how you want to get off to a good start by filling up your prison pile as quickly as possible. So if your opponent's starting setup has a lot of low life units, that's really good for you, as you'll be able to fill up your prison pile easier and more quickly. That's just something in general, that the more low life units your enemy, or your opponent, I should say, brings, the better off the warden is generally. Now, with regards to deck building, there's a lot of different ways you can go here. There's a lot of variation in terms of champs, mutations, and commons here. There's a lot of very different, very valid ways to go about this. But I'm just going to briefly talk about how my approach in thinking about how to deck build for this is. So I'm going to include roughly the same amount of taskmasters and prisoners in the base deck. Might take out I'm going to include a couple oafs as well, to take advantage of maybe some of that whip ability to get some enraged attacks going. For champions, I'm thinking of including Scabicus because he's just great. I think he works so well in this deck, and works pretty well in Demagogue and other Cave Goblin decks as well. I think I'm going to include Mook too, just because he's such a good value, and he is so great at increasing the attack results of my Cave Goblin units. And I'm also probably going to include the Incanter Mutant, which is so good here. In fact, probably the best fit, I think, for him is in the Warden's deck, because you get these multi-life point common units, so he's better protected. You're not just giving away his 2 magic quickly. And he can give all of these units +2 to their attack value, which is great. And if you have Mook in the game too to increase their die results, you can be consistently giving out a lot of damage with just these cheap little commons, which is really cool. I think I'm also going to include some other mutants, such as the Grotesque Mutant. I think he's a real good fit in the Warden's deck. I really like his ability to fill up the prison pile, so I just, again, think he's a good fit here. I'm going to include the Barb Mutant just because he's a good all-around solid mutant. It's kind of hard not to want to put him in any deck. Next is the Claw Mutant, which, again, is so good, kind of like the Barb Mutant, that you don't, regardless of what your strategy is, he's probably going to be useful in the matchup. So I just want to include him anyway. And you probably want at least 1 4-cost mutant in your deck, just to take advantage of the enlist, to get the for your economy, you get 1 expensive mutant out for free, which is cool. Another champion slot, I'm going to play around with that quite a bit, but I think Conquezo, or Conqueso with cheese, is a good, solid utility champ from the Mercenaries. He's cheap and effective, and yeah, I don't think you're going to be having a ton of magic in your magic pile if you're playing the Warden, because you're going to be putting a lot of units in the prison pile instead, so you probably don't want really too many expensive units in this game, or in this deck. So if your highest cost unit you have in your deck is 5, I think this makes it very manageable. You could get out a lot of relatively cheap but very good units, and I think that's the best way to go. There's a lot of options here. I think I'm also going to include the Horror Mutant, just because, like the Claw in the Barb Mutant, just a very solid mutant overall. Kind of works with any strategy because his stats and ability are just that good. He also works here because helps you bring the warden into further into the battlefield and gives them some protection. So you can start pinging some units from farther away and they can't retaliate because of his ability. It also allows you to advance further so that you can use the enlisted event in an advantageous, more aggressive position, which is pretty cool. So I think the Horror Mutant would work pretty well here. Thank you for watching. I apologize for the great length of this video. There were a lot of different units to cover here, I think more than any other faction. There was also a lot of strategic ground to cover. This is probably one of the deeper factions, I think, one of the harder ones to grasp. I think that I've barely begun to scratch the surface here, and so I look forward to hearing from any of my viewers as to what their thoughts on the Warden are, or any deck building ideas that you have. Again, thanks for watching.